Hey everyone, and welcome back. Are you ready to dive into some fascinating stuff? Because today we're taking a look at the early days of Trump's second term.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But we're not just scratching the surface. We're going deeper into what the American public is really thinking about all this.
Yeah, beyond the headlines, right?
Exactly. We've got polls from CBS News, YouGov, Pew Research, even Fox News.
Wow, that's a range.
It is, right?
Right.
And we've got some sharp analyses to sift through. So much to unpack.
Sounds like it.
What do you think is the most surprising thing we found so far?
That's a tough one. There's a lot to choose from, but I'd say it's this disconnect between the general narrative, the media's take, and what the numbers are actually telling us.
Oh, that's interesting.
Public opinion is like this constantly shifting beast, right? And sometimes it reveals things that get totally missed by the official story.
Okay, so spill the beans.
Yeah.
What's standing out to you?
Well, for one, Trump's approval ratings are sky high.
Really?
Yeah.
Higher than expected.
Way higher. Higher than when he started his first term. And get this, the Pew Research Center says they're higher than at any point during his first term.
Wow, okay. So the CBS News YouGov poll had him at 53% approval, right?
Yep, a number they've never recorded for him before.
So are we looking at like a honeymoon phase 2.0? Or is something more fundamental going on?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's not just a honeymoon period, though, that might be playing a role. What we're seeing is this link between what Trump is actually doing and the public's perception that he's keeping his promises.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, a whopping 70% of Americans believe he's doing what he said he would do. And that's based on both the CBS and Fox News polls. So it's not just one outlier.
70%, that's huge.
Right. That's not just a number, it's a statement.
But wait, doesn't that contradict everything we've heard about Trump being unpredictable?
Yeah.
Always changing his mind?
Right. But that's what's so fascinating. People seem to be zeroing in on the consistency of what he's actually doing, particularly on the issues he really hammered home during his campaign.
Okay, I'm starting to see what you mean.
Take the deportation program, for example. 59% approval. And it aligns perfectly with what he was saying on the campaign trail.
Interesting.
Same with sending troops to the border, 64% approval. Again, it's a promise kept.
So it's almost like actions speak louder than words in this case.
That's a great way to put it. And it might explain why some of the more controversial stuff about his personality or communication style that's taking a backseat to this idea that he's delivering on concrete promises.
Okay, so you're saying people are judging him more on what he does than what he says.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big shift.
Okay, so far so good for Trump, it seems. But I'm guessing there's got to be a but somewhere in these polls, right?
Oh, you bet. There is. And it's a big one. The economy.
I knew it.
While Trump seems to be winning on the keeping promises front, a clear majority, 66% to be exact, believe he's not doing enough to tackle rising prices.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
I think inflation was a huge issue in the election, and it seems a lot of people are still waiting for things to improve.
You hit the nail on the head. Inflation was a major talking point, and it seems a lot of Americans haven't seen the relief they were hoping for.
Right. So are they connecting this directly to Trump's policies? Or is it more like a general feeling of economic anxiety?
That's the question, isn't it? Unfortunately, the polls don't give us a clear-cut answer. What we do see is a more nuanced picture when it comes to tariffs.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, tariffs on China seem to be popular overall, but when it comes to using tariffs more broadly, there are definitely concerns about them driving prices up.
Right, because it's like a balancing act. Trying to protect domestic industries, but also trying to keep things affordable for consumers.
Exactly. And the polls show that 3/4 of Americans think slapping new tariffs on imported goods will just lead to price increases, not necessarily more jobs, or stopping things like fentanyl trafficking.
So the question is that balancing act working? Is the public buying what Trump's selling?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And to answer it, I think we need to go beyond the basic economic indicators. We need to look at the psychological impact of these policies.
Like how people are feeling about their financial situation?
Exactly, and how much they're attributing that feeling to Trump's actions. That's where things get really complex.
Okay, so we've got this interesting dynamic, Trump delivering on some promises, but this economic anxiety hanging over everything.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got the whole Elon Musk factor, which seems to be throwing everyone for a loop.
Oh, yeah. Elon Musk and Duo GE, that's a whole other can of worms.
Seriously, who saw that coming?
Right. The Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk, talk about a plot twist.
It's almost like something out of a movie.
It really is. But here we are with Musk at the helm, aiming to revolutionize the government, make it leaner, meaner, more efficient. Classic Elon.
It's definitely a bold move by Trump.
And as you might expect, the public's reaction is mixed. Some people are really excited about it. They see Musk as this problem solver, a disruptor who can bring some much-needed innovation to the government.
And I bet they're loving the whole DOGE thing, too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's brilliant branding, whether it was intentional or not.
Yeah, it's catchy.
But on the other side, you've got the Democrats who are far more skeptical. They worry about giving too much power to a billionaire, and they're not convinced that Musk's vision will actually benefit everyday Americans.
So is this a stroke of genius by Trump, or is it a recipe for disaster? I mean, handing over the reins of government to someone with no experience in public service, that's a big gamble.
It is. And the stakes are high. It really boils down to a fundamental question. How much influence should wealth, technology, and private enterprise have on the future of government?
Wow. So DOGE is almost like a Rorschach test for how people view the role of government in general.
Exactly. And it highlights how even seemingly unrelated issues can tap into these deeper societal anxieties and political divisions.
And speaking of divisions, we can't ignore the elephant in the room. The partisan divide seems to be influencing everything from views on DOGE to Trump's overall approval rating. It's almost like we're living in two separate realities.
You're not wrong. While those overall approval numbers might look good for Trump, they hide a deep split between the two parties.
So you're saying that 53% approval rating, even though it sounds like a solid majority,
Yeah,
it's actually built on a pretty shaky foundation.
exactly. The Pew Research data shows us that 84% of Republicans approve of Trump. But among Democrats, it's only 10%.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
It is. And it makes you wonder, is common ground even possible anymore?
It's like we've lost the ability to have a rational conversation, to see things from another perspective.
And that's something that will definitely impact Trump's second term, no matter what policies he ends up pursuing. Governing in this kind of polarized environment, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, it's big weight on his shoulders.
It makes you wonder, can any president truly unite a nation that seems so divided?
That's a question we'll probably be grappling with throughout this entire deep dive.
And probably for years to come.
But before we get too bogged down in all that, let's end this section with a little classic Trump, shall we? Remember those comments he made about potentially taking over Gaza?
Oh yeah, that definitely made headlines.
It did. And while most of the world saw it as typical Trump being provocative, I'm curious what the American public thought about it.
The polls paint a bit of a mixed picture, honestly pretty typical for Trump. While a majority of Americans approve of his overall handling of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, very few actually think taking over Gaza is a good idea.
Only 13% thought it would be beneficial.
That's right.
So even his supporters have their limits.
It seems so. They're willing to go so far with this tough guy approach. But there's a line.
So what does this tell us about how the public views Trump's foreign policy? Strategic or reckless?
Well, that's the puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are these comments just bluster meant to shake things up and put pressure on other players? Or do they signal a real shift towards a more assertive, maybe even unilateralist approach to foreign policy?
I mean, it's Trump, so it's hard to say.
Right. And then there's the question of how much weight people are giving to his actual actions versus just his words. Because, let's be real, there's often a gap there.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of talk, but does it translate into action?
Exactly. And that gap, that's what makes understanding public opinion so tricky. It's not just about what people say they think. It's about what they really believe deep down, what drives them, what anxieties they're grappling with.
And those underlying factors, they can be much more revealing than any poll.
Absolutely.
Wow. I feel like we've already uncovered so much here. It's fascinating to see how Trump is exceeding expectations on some fronts, but facing these major challenges on others, all against this backdrop of extreme partisan division.
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag.
So what's your gut feeling? Is this all shaping up to be a successful second term for Trump, or is it all about to come crashing down?
Well, that's the question we'll be exploring as we dig deeper into specific policy areas and see how the public is responding to them. But one thing's for sure, the second term is already shaping up to be anything but predictable.
Yeah, no kidding. This is going to be a wild ride.
Buckle up.
And for our listeners, get ready. We're just getting started.
So we were just talking about how divided public opinion is right now. Like, even when it comes to Trump's overall approval,
Yeah, it's like we're having two completely different conversations at the same time. Each side's talking past the other.
Right, exactly. It's a real paradox. High approval overall, but this huge gap between Republicans and Democrats.
Exactly. But let's focus on one area where this divide is super obvious. Immigration and border security.
Hmm.
You know, this was like a core issue for Trump's campaign. And his actions have definitely sparked some strong reactions.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's impossible to talk about Trump's second term without bringing up immigration. And, like we saw in the polls, there's rock-solid support for certain things, like the deportations and the troops at the border.
Right, but those policies might resonate with his base. But what about everyone else? Are they fully on board?
That's where things get interesting. Right. While some people might like the idea of stricter border control, they might not be comfortable with how it's actually being done.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like, take the detention centers, for example. Popular with those who voted for Trump in 2024, but way more controversial with the general public.
And then there were those leaked photos from some of the facilities.
Right, exactly.
Those images sparked a lot of outrage and brought the whole debate about the human cost of these policies back to the forefront.
It was a harsh reminder that these policy debates are rarely black and white. You can support the goal of something, but still be really troubled by how they're trying to achieve it.
It's about values, right?
Yeah.
And how those values translate into action. And speaking of values, we got to talk about tariffs. Remember, this was a major part of Trump's economic plan, but it's a double-edged sword, right?
Totally. While tariffs on China might be popular with sometimes, the broader use of tariffs has created this anxiety about prices going up. Remember, 3/4 of Americans think new tariffs will just make things more expensive. They don't think it'll bring back jobs or stop fentanyl.
So it's this classic trade-off, trying to protect American businesses and workers, but maybe hurting consumers in the process. So is the public buying it?
Well, that's what's interesting. We're seeing this economic anxiety play out across all demographics, not just those directly hit by tariffs. Remember that 66% who think Trump isn't doing enough to lower prices?
Yeah.
That cuts across party lines. So it suggests a deeper unease about the economy, and that could spell trouble for Trump's approval rating down the line.
Even if people like what he's doing on immigration, even if they're willing to give him a chance on tariffs, in the end, their wallets might decide everything.
Exactly. And that brings us back to how complex public opinion really is. It's not just about individual issues. It's about how all these things connect to people's actual lives, their hopes, their fears, their pocketbooks.
Okay, so we've got immigration tariffs, this economic anxiety, and then on top of all that, we've got Elon Musk and DOGE.
Oh, yeah. We can't forget about DOGE.
It's like a whole other layer of crazy on top of everything else.
Right. I mean, it's a wild card. The Department of Government Efficiency led by Elon Musk. It sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It really does. And the public's reaction is all over the place. Some think Musk is this visionary who can fix a bloated and inefficient government.
Right. Like he's going to come in and wave his magic wand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then others see him as a total loose cannon. Someone who just wants to blow things up, not actually govern.
And this is where you really see that partisan divide Republicans, they tend to be on board with Musk. They see him as a problem solver, someone who can shake things up.
And I'm sure they love that it's called DOGE too.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, after the whole meme stock thing a few years back, it's brilliant marketing.
Oh, totally. Whether they meant to or not, it's genius. But the Democrats, they're not buying it. They're worried about giving a billionaire so much power.
Makes sense.
And they're not convinced that this whole revolution is going to help average Americans.
So is DOGE a stroke of genius by Trump? Bring in this outsider to fix things? Or is it a recipe for total disaster, like handing over the government to someone with no experience?
That's the debate, right? And it goes way beyond DOGE. It's about a much bigger question. What role should wealth technology private enterprise have in the future of government?
So DOGE is almost like a test, a way to see how people feel about the role of government in society in general.
Yeah, it's like a litmus test. And it shows how these seemingly unrelated issues can become these flashpoints for all these deeper anxieties and political divisions.
And those anxieties are fueled by the real problems facing a lot of Americans.
Yeah.
We talked about the economy, but there's also this general feeling of unease about the future. Is the American dream even possible anymore?
That's a big one. And that unease, it's creating an environment where people are looking for unconventional solutions, like Elon Musk and his promises to shake things up.
Right. It's like anything but the status quo.
But whether that disruption actually leads to positive change, well, that's the question.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Immigration, tariffs, DOGE, this underlying anxiety. What's the big takeaway for you? Are you seeing any patterns in how the public is responding to all this?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that we're in uncharted territory. The old rules of politics, they don't seem to apply anymore.
How so?
Public opinion is all over the place. Anxieties are high, and people are looking for answers in unexpected places.
So what does this mean for Trump's second term? Can he even navigate this crazy landscape? And how will public opinion shape his decisions, his successes, his failures.
That's what we're going to be exploring as we dig deeper into specific policies and how the public is reacting to them. One thing is for sure, this is a presidency unlike any other, and the only thing we can really count on is uncertainty.
Okay, buckle up, everyone, because this is going to be a wild ride.
Oh, yeah.
And for our listeners, we're just getting started. Let's take a closer look at one of the most controversial parts of Trump's second term, his foreign policy approach. Get ready. This is where things get really interesting. Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to dive into one of the most talked about aspects of Trump's second term, his foreign policy. You know, we've seen some pretty bold moves already.
Yeah, it's been anything but quiet on the world stage.
And it seems like everyone have an opinion. I'm curious what the American public is thinking about all this.
Well, public opinion isn't just about what's happening here at home.
Right.
It's about how the president is projecting American power and values on the global stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin? What's the biggest foreign policy story right now? The one everyone's focused on.
Well, I think we got to start with the Middle East. Trump's approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been, how should I put it?
Unconventional.
Yeah, let's go with unconventional. And remember those comments about maybe taking over Gaza?
Oh, yeah. How could we forget?
That really shook things up internationally.
Definitely left people wondering if he was serious or just, messing around.
Right. Like, what's the game plan here?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what did the American public think?
Well, the polls show a mixed bag, as usual with Trump.
Yeah, that tracks.
Most people seem to approve of how he's handling the conflict overall. But when it comes to actually taking over Gaza, there's way less support.
How much less?
Only 13% thought it would be a good idea.
13%?
Wow. So even among his supporters, there's a limit to how far they're willing to go with this whole tough guy act. It's like they're saying, okay, we get it, you're strong, but maybe chill out a bit.
Right. It's like there's a line.
And it shows just how tricky foreign policy can be. You got to project strength, but you also don't want to alienate your allies or make things worse.
It's a tough balancing act.
For sure. But you know what's interesting to me? How domestic issues seem to be bleeding into people's views on foreign policy. Remember that connection we saw with support for Trump's Middle East policy and views on immigration?
Oh, yeah, totally.
It's like people are looking for a consistent worldview, something that makes sense.
Right. If you're all about stricter immigration, you might be more likely to support a president who's taking a hard line in the Middle East, too.
Exactly. Someone who seems to be pushing back against these outside threats.
So it's all connected.
It is. It's not just about foreign policy in isolation. It's about how it fits into these bigger anxieties and narratives that people have about the world.
It's about creating order and security in a world that feels chaotic.
And that brings us back to public opinion. It's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding the deeper beliefs and values that shape how people see the world.
And how those views then influence the actions of their leaders.
Exactly. It's a two-way street.
So this deep dive, it's not just about observing what's happening.
Right.
It's about understanding WHY it's happening.
Yeah.
And what it all means for the future.
And how we as citizens can be more informed and engaged.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. Look at the big picture. We've talked about approval ratings, immigration, the economy, Elon Musk, foreign policy. What are the key takeaways from all this? What do we want our listeners to walk away with?
Well, I think there are three main things to remember. First, Trump is definitely riding a wave of popularity right now. His approval ratings are higher than many expected.
Okay.
And this is probably due to a few things, like people thinking he's keeping some of his promises.
Right.
And there's also that general sense of optimism that comes with a new administration.
Like a fresh start.
Exactly. But second, despite those good numbers, there are some red flags, especially when it comes to the economy. Inflation is still a big worry for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's not going away.
And if Trump can't deliver on his economic promises, those approval ratings could plummet.
So it's a bit precarious.
It is.
Yeah.
And third, we can't forget about the elephant in the room. Public opinion is super divided along party lines.
That's been a constant theme throughout all of this.
And we see it everywhere in how people view Trump's policies, Elon Musk's role, you name it. This division makes governing incredibly tough. It's like Trump's constantly walking on eggshells trying to keep everyone happy.
So he's got his work cut out for him.
He does. But one thing's for sure, public opinion matters a lot. It shapes how we talk about politics, it influences policy decisions, and ultimately it decides whether presidents succeed or fail.
And that's where you, the listener, come in. Public opinion isn't some abstract thing. It's all of our voices combined, our beliefs, our hopes, our worries.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay curious.
I love that. Because the more we understand about what's happening in the world, the better prepared we'll be to shape our own future.
Couldn't agree more.
This has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we've covered so much.
Me too.
And I hope everyone listening has learned a lot too. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going.